Good morning, everybody. I am here with my good friend Jim Parks, pastor of West Fresno Christian Center, and you've already been enjoying the combined Northpark and West Fresno Christian Center worship team. Jim, it's good to have you here.
Thank you, Bob. It's good to be here.
All right. Now, those of us who attend Northpark, we've met Jim before. He has spoken here several times. Our worship teams have led together several times. Many of you know Jim was raised in Arkansas under Jim Crow laws, moved to California toward the end of high school, and ended up at Harvard Law School. I'm always intimidated when I'm with Jim because he's a Harvard-trained lawyer. But I love this man. Some of you have heard his story. But I want to ask him today, Jim, we're living in crazy days, aren't we?
Yes.
I mean, not only is there a pandemic, there's been the George Floyd killing, we have to call it, by a police officer. There's been all of the protests, many of which have been peaceful, but some have gotten kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It's a different world we live in today. But I want to ask you, what's it like being a black man in America?
That's a tough question because, as you know, I kind of grew up in apartheid, and but now I'm more hopeful than I ever have been. Even though I think a lot of black men are more on edge than ever before, because it just seems like there's open season on black men without any significant repercussions against the people who actually are out there killing us. So it's a scary thing. At the same time, it's a hopeful thing, and I'm hopeful because there's so many other ethnic groups out there who are marching. And I'm concerned, though, that the people who have other agendas other than equal justice are infiltrating the peaceful groups and creating violence, and that's a distraction against what the issues are all about. We don't want to ever forget that the reason all of this is happening is because of what one white police officer did in Minneapolis. And I think that's getting lost in all of the media coverage of other things that are going on. You know, every major riot we've ever had in this country in recent years, since the 60s, have been caused by police force against a black person. Every one of them. In Watts, Detroit. Now, it's the same igniting fuse. And it seems like now people are beginning to realize that, hey, something is wrong. And so, how do I feel as a black man? Cautiously optimistic that this time things will be different, because it seems like people now are beginning to believe our stories that we've been telling for years before we had cell phones to actually videotape what was going on. They saw a man with his knee on another man's neck for more than 8 minutes. The man kept saying, "I can't breathe." We can't live if we can't breathe. And he just continued that until he just took the man's life in front of all the people who were watching. So they can't say he was resisting because he was on his stomach with his hands cuffed behind his back. 2 other officers on him at the same time. So that's just an execution. And that's been going on for hundreds of years.
I've learned so much the last couple of years from you and Paul Benyon and Ray Scott and B.T. Lewis and DJ Kreiner, all my friends, and I've loved building those relationships. But from a white guy's perspective, it's different from us when we leave our house.
Of course.
What is it that you face when you go out? How is it different?
I was talking to my grandson about this recently. He's in his late 20s. And we live not too far from here. And in the past, he just go out. He's a personal trainer. He goes out, he jogs. Now he's saying, you know, Grandpa, when I jog now, I'm a little afraid. He said, I make sure that I don't have anything in my pockets so they don't think I've stolen something. You know, a man shouldn't have to feel fearful of jogging in his own community, that he's going to be accosted by police officers or some white person saying, what are you doing here? That's happened to us in this city, in Clovis. What are you doing in this neighborhood? I live here. No, you don't. Because he's was a black man. So it's, what do you do? I mean, I think that the thing that needs to happen, and I kind of got this idea from a friend of mine, Herman Hamilton, who pastors a church in Redwood City. He talked about how when Lazarus was dead, how Mary and Martha had sent for the Lord, and he just ignored. He seemingly ignored them, and when he showed up, Mary and Martha had been traumatized by what had happened. And when they came to him, when you read between the lines, they are kind of upset with him, accusing him. If you'd only been here, this wouldn't have happened. When we come to you with the traumatization we've been through, Jesus models how you do that. What did he do? He listened. He didn't get defensive. He listened. And when Mary cried, he cried with her. He lamented with her. And when he said, show me where you laid him, he walked with her. You can't walk in my shoes. You can walk with me and learn where I'm going. And when he got there, he did the unexpected. Where hope had been lost, he restored it by raising him from the dead. But at the same time, he never defended himself. He never said, well, you just wait and see what happens. He just listened. And that's what a lot of people have said, I know how you feel. That's the wrong start. The next thing is, well, there have been slaves in other countries. That's the wrong place to start. There's never been a slavery like we've had in this country. And I think, Bob, the best hope for any progress on this issue is the church. I'm not talking about organized, I mean Christian people who really love the Lord and who care what the truth is. There has to be a realization that Jesus hates racism. He hates injustice. You know, people, they don't know their own history. Well, they ignore it, perhaps. Abraham Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free the slaves, not all of them. It just freed the slaves who were living in states that were in rebellion against the government. So we think that he freed all. No, he did not. The 13th Amendment. But it had a little quirk to it. You can't have involuntary servitude unless a person has been convicted of a crime. So it gave an out to Jim Crow. Now you're convicted of a crime, I can make you go work for somebody else because the 13th Amendment says I can do that. So they have manipulated the laws and justified slavery, saying that, well, it's the curse of Ham. I heard Jeff Sessions justify taking kids from their parents using the scriptures to justify it. So, and there's a Bible museum in Washington, D.C., and one of the things on exhibit is the slave Bible, where there was actually a Bible that was designed specifically for slaves that took out things that related to freedom. So they gave us a watered down Christianity. So there's a lot that can be done, a lot that should be done, and a lot that must be done. Just yesterday, another officer in New York used a chokehold that's already outlawed in New York against a black man, and he was saying, guess what? I can't breathe. When will it stop? And it can't stop without more than just black people. It's got to stop.
So you said already that we need to listen.
Yes.
That's what we need to do. We need to understand. And like I said, you and many other friends of mine have, I've asked hard questions. Yeah. And you have given me hard answers, and I appreciate it. So what would you say to John Smith out there? Maybe a white guy that lives in an upper middle class neighborhood in Clovis. He's surrounded primarily by people with his own skin color, same socioeconomic status, but maybe he's deciding he needs to understand, he needs to learn. Who would he go to? What would he do?
Hopefully he knows at least one black person.
Yeah.
Talk and be willing to listen. And first of all, don't get defensive. We're not blaming people today for what happened 100 years ago. But we have to hold them accountable for what's happening now and what doesn't happen now. So he needs to seek out some person, and he and that person need to have an open, honest, heart-to-heart conversation without either one being judgmental of the other one. And he'll gain some insight, and guess what? The black person will too. Because I've often wondered, man, how can white people do these things and say they're not racist? And I saw about a week and a half ago an interview of Dr. Anita Phillips. She's an African-American PhD who specializes in mental health. She's also a preacher, married to a bishop. And she said when she was in graduate school, she had this white professor who was overseeing some work that she was doing, and they were continuing clashing with each other. And she found out that it was the same way with all the other black people who he was supervising. And she was really disturbed by it, so she began to pray and fast and ask God to help her understand what's going on, because I know he's not a racist. I know he loves me. What's going on? And she came up with the conclusion that there's something she calls implicit cultural memory. And she said, what's happened in this country is not discrimination, it's dehumanization. What they did was dehumanized black folks enough so that it would be okay to mistreat them the way they did. Can you imagine lynching a black man and inviting families to watch the lynching? Not just the man, but his wife and his children, because he's subhuman in some way. And she said, when you dehumanize folks over 100 years, after a while, you don't have to say anything. It's just ingrained in their culture. And she gave an example of when they were showing police officers, little black boys and little white boys. The officers would, on an average, guess the age of the black boy 4.5 years older than what he really was. And if they showed pictures of a cat before they guessed the age, it stayed about 4.5 years. If they showed pictures of an ape, it increased more than 4.5 years. So when a police officer saw a black boy he automatically thinks he's older than what he really is. At the same time, the white boys, they guess their ages is younger than they really were. And she said, now, just to show you that I'm not trying to pick on police officers, it's just ingrained in our culture. They had a test where they were talking with preschool teachers or kindergarten teachers, very early age teachers. And they said there are 4 kids. There are a little black boy, little white boy, little black girl, little white girl. And they said, now you watch out for the troublemaker in the group. There were no troublemakers. But every teacher's eyes went to the black boy. And when they explained to the teachers what the experiment was all about, they were devastated. Because even at that age, they'd already looked upon him as being a troublemaker. Just because it's been ingrained in our culture. So when white people do things and they say, I'm not a racist, I understand now why they say that. Because they don't understand that they're just doing what's in their muscle memory as in terms of the culture. It's been handed down. When I come to your church and preach, when we do praise and worship, I look out at your audience, your congregation. Now in my congregation, folks be raising their hands and clapping their hands and maybe shouting. And it's different. But it's the culture. And so what she said was, I understood that it was not the professor who was being raised. It was a cultural difference, not a theological difference. And that helps me understand why my white friends can't see things the way I do.
So what I'm hearing is you're saying a lot of us white folks, we just look and we just don't understand.
You can't understand.
Okay.
And I've had people say to me, I understand. I said, no, you don't. You don't worry when your kid, I've got 4 grandsons and a great-grandson. I want them to live in a society that they don't have to worry about getting pulled over or stopped for no reason other than they are black. I've told you about my grandson who got stopped about 40 times by the Fresno Police Department delivering pizzas. He had his uniform on. He had a cap, said me and Ed's. They wanted to look in the trunk. You got drugs? I'm delivering pizza. What are you doing in this neighborhood? I'm delivering pizza. Never gave him a ticket. They just stopped him because he was DWB, driving while black. And it happens all over this country.
Well, like we've already talked about a little bit, relationship is key.
Yes.
And I know for us, I mean, our churches have done things together. We're trying to build relationships. I know we have a big women's thing every quarter, and women from your church have been coming, and it's a great friendship that we're developing.
Yes.
And this is kind of a broad question, but I want to end with this question. What is it that me as a white pastor and Northpark Community Church is predominantly a white congregation, what is it that we can do to help?
Model Christ. Love what Christ loves. Support what Christ would support. And the other thing that really gets me as a black man is our president. Now, he chose to go to Tulsa on the Juneteenth weekend, first on Juneteenth, but on Juneteenth weekend, in a place where the Tulsa massacre took place in 1921. And it seems to me that rather than trying to heal the nation, he's actually dividing the nation. And the thing that bothers me so much more about that is that his base of support are people that call themselves evangelical Christians. And I've heard people told me I could never become a Christian if Christian can support a guy like Donald Trump. I frankly believe that the Christian support of this man, who, if he ain't a racist, he sure got a lot of racist things to say, that has done more harm to the cause of Christ than anything I can think of in this century.
Here again, Jim, why do you think that's the case? Is it a cultural ignorance that leads to that, or is it something deeper?
Well, I don't know. I think he's, well, and I can't get in the man's mind, but it appears that his appeal is to the baser instincts of man, the hatred. He's exploiting the race thing, maybe subconsciously, maybe deliberately, but the church is falling for that, and it's destroying its power with people who are non-Christians. Our job, our responsibility is to make disciples of men, and our focus can't be on politics that divide. I'm an enigma. I'm, in some ways, some folks say I'm a conservative. Some will say I'm a liberal. I'm a Democrat who votes for Republicans sometimes, because it's not the party that could, it should be the principle. I believe in pro-marriage, man and a woman. I believe that abortion. I believe in pro-life, not just pro-birth, which is what most pro-life folks believe in, because once the person is born, get sick and die without insurance, we don't care. So, or we don't seem to care. Before Obamacare, they estimated that between 20,000 and 40,000 people were dying each year without insurance. Why would billionaires pay billions of dollars to make sure that Americans die every year at that rate? And why would you support somebody who would advocate a plan that makes sure that the sanctity of life does not matter for people who get sick? I don't think we've thought this thing through. If you are pro-birth, fine, but I'm pro-life from conception to the crypt, from the womb to the tomb. So what has happened is we've allowed the politicians to politicize issues that are moral issues, not political issues. It's a thing about right or wrong. And we have taken the bait that's out there for people who not necessarily are concerned about the masses, but generally they're concerned about themselves. So it's a complicated issue, but I think it's one that bears discussion. We can't ignore this. We can't ignore the fact that there are some truths about us and about our nation that are unpleasant. But the Lord said, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Now, I know he's talking about salvation, but we can't ignore the truth. If anyone should stand for the truth, it ought to be us.
You're right.
And so we as pastors need to tell our people, look, the truth sometimes is uncomfortable, but nevertheless, it's the truth, and we can't ignore it. We need to be an example to the world as to how Christ loves everybody. Here's another thing. Christians shouldn't hate. Christians are now labeled as a hate group because of some people, and maybe misguided, but I don't question their heart. I just question their response to the issues. You can't hate people homosexuals. they're just sinners. We've adopted that sin and made it like, oh my God, what about adultery? That was a capital crime under the law. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about pride. We don't make that a political issue. How about lying? Read Proverbs 6:16. All those things that God says are abominations. We don't talk about those things, but they have politicized moral issues and made you take sides.
Yep. So it's time for us to come together.
Yes.
It's time for us to understand each other. Yeah. It's time to us to be the ones that model real morality.
Yeah.
It's time for us to make our stand and our statement for Christ together.
Yeah. I appreciate you, Bob. I appreciate you. And my folks love your folks. And my folks love you. I'm jealous. They love you.
Well, good. Well, I'm
grateful.
I love them too. Well, thank you, Jim, so much for being with us today. I really, really do appreciate your openness, your honesty. Most of all, I just love your friendship. You and Gwen. I love being with you. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me. I may not come back again after this conversation, but
yeah, you may.
God bless you.
You are always welcome.
Thank you for tolerating me, brother. I appreciate
All right.
you. If I love to, Mary Ellen. Okay.
All right. Now back to some more worship.